The little girl couldn't see the police cars, but her dog could. The October air carried the scent of rain-soaked pavement through downtown Portland, Oregon. Gray clouds hung low over the city, turning the afternoon light into a muted silver glow that reflected off shop windows and parked cars. People hurried along the sidewalks with warm coffee cups in their hands, collars turned up against the chill, focused on their own destinations. No one expected the next few minutes to become the story everyone would remember. 10-year-old Emily Carter walked carefully along the edge of the sidewalk, one small hand resting lightly on the harness of her German Shepherd. She couldn't see the traffic lights changing overhead. She couldn't see the crowded crosswalk ahead. She couldn't see the curious glances from strangers who noticed her white cane. But she trusted the dog beside her more than she trusted anything else in the world. Atlas moved with calm confidence. His black and tan coat gleamed despite the cloudy sky, and his amber eyes scanned every movement around them. To most people, he looked like a well-trained service dog doing his job. To Emily, he was much more than that. He was her guide, her protector, and her closest friend. The sound of distant sirens drifted through the city blocks. Emily tilted her head slightly. "That's a lot of sirens today, Atlas," she said softly. Atlas's ears twitched. He slowed his pace. Something in the air felt different. The dog's muscles tightened beneath his thick coat. Emily noticed immediately. She always did. "What is it, boy?" she whispered. Atlas didn't answer with a bark. He rarely barked while working. Instead, he focused on something ahead. Something only he seemed to notice. Across the street, two police cruisers rolled to a stop. Their lights flashed silently in the gray afternoon. Pedestrians stepped aside. Conversations paused. A few people instinctively pulled out their phones. The officers exited their vehicles and began scanning the area. Atlas stopped walking. Completely. Emily nearly stumbled before realizing her dog had frozen in place. "Atlas?" she asked gently. The German Shepherd remained motionless. His eyes locked forward. His breathing slowed. Every instinct inside him seemed suddenly awake. Officer Ryan Mercer spotted the pair almost immediately. His gaze moved from the service harness to the young girl holding the handle. Something about them caught his attention. He exchanged a brief look with his partner before starting toward them. Emily heard approaching footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, official. Her fingers tightened slightly around Atlas's harness. The crowd nearby began to notice. Heads turned. Voices lowered. A teenager across the street lifted his phone to record. Then another did the same. Within seconds, several strangers were watching. Atlas shifted forward, placing himself subtly between Emily and the approaching officers. Not aggressive, not fearful, protective, the way only a devoted service dog could be. Officer Mercer slowed when he noticed the dog's posture. "Easy there, buddy," he said calmly. Emily swallowed. "Is something wrong, officer?" Her voice was small but steady. Mercer looked down at her. For a brief moment, he seemed unsure how to answer. "We just need to ask a few questions." The words spread through the crowd faster than the wind. Questions. Police. Blind girl. Service dog. Curious whispers rippled across the sidewalk. Emily felt dozens of unseen eyes settling on her. Atlas felt them too. But he wasn't watching the crowd. He wasn't watching the officers. He was staring somewhere else entirely. Beyond the gathering spectators. Beyond the flashing lights. Beyond the line of parked vehicles stretching down the block. His ears rose higher. A low sound vibrated deep inside his chest. Almost too quiet for anyone to hear. Almost. Officer Mercer noticed. So did his partner. Atlas took one step forward. Then another. His eyes never leaving a single point in the distance. Emily felt the movement through the harness and frowned. "Atlas?" she whispered. The German Shepherd didn't move his gaze. Rain began to fall in soft droplets from the darkening sky. The crowd shuffled beneath awnings and umbrellas. Sirens echoed somewhere far away. And in that strange moment, surrounded by police officers, strangers, and unanswered questions, the only one who seemed to understand that something was terribly wrong was the dog. Officer Mercer held up a reassuring hand as the rain continued to fall. "You are not in trouble," he said gently, though the tension in his voice suggested the situation was far from ordinary. Emily nodded but remained silent. She had learned long ago that people often spoke one thing while feeling another. Atlas remained perfectly still beside her, every muscle alert beneath his thick coat. The German shepherd seemed less interested in the officers than in something hidden somewhere beyond them. Emily reached down and rested her fingers against his neck. His fur felt warm despite the cold afternoon. That simple touch carried her somewhere else, somewhere far from flashing lights and curious strangers. 3 years earlier, darkness had arrived without warning. A summer storm had rolled across the Oregon coast while Emily and her parents were returning from a family trip. The world she remembered afterward was not made of colors or shapes. It was made of sounds, hospital monitors, quiet conversations, the steady hum of air conditioning, the gentle voice of her grandfather trying not to cry when he thought she was asleep. By the time autumn arrived that year, Emily understood that her eyesight would not return. The realization settled over her young heart like a heavy blanket. At first, she stopped talking much. She stopped laughing. Even familiar rooms felt unfamiliar. Every doorway became a question. Every staircase became a challenge. The world seemed larger than before, but somehow much lonelier. Then Atlas entered her life. He had been barely 2 years old at the time, a German shepherd with exceptional service training and a temperament that instructors described as unusually intuitive. Emily still remembered the first moment she touched him. She could not see his face. She could not see his eyes. But she felt his calm presence immediately. While other dogs in the training program had approached excitedly, Atlas simply sat beside her. Patient, quiet, waiting. The trainer had placed Emily's small hand against the side of his neck. Atlas had not moved an inch. He already trusts you, the trainer said softly. Emily smiled for the first time in months. From that day forward, they became inseparable. Atlas guided her through crowded sidewalks, school hallways, grocery stores, and city parks. He stopped at curbs before she could stumble. He found empty seats in busy waiting rooms. He learned the routes she traveled so often that he could practically predict where she wanted to go before she spoke. More importantly, Atlas gave her something no medical treatment ever could: confidence. Little by little, Emily stopped fearing the world. She learned how to navigate downtown streets. She learned how to ride public transportation. She learned how to trust herself again. And whenever fear tried to return, Atlas was there. A steady heartbeat beside her. A silent promise that she would never face uncertainty alone. Back in the present, another raindrop rolled down Emily's cheek. She brushed it away. Around them, the crowd had grown larger. Umbrellas dotted the sidewalk like dark flowers. People whispered theories to one another, none of them knowing the truth. Officer Mercer glanced toward his radio as a transmission crackled softly through the speaker attached to his shoulder. His expression tightened for only a second before returning to calm professionalism. Emily heard the radio but could not make out the words. Atlas heard every syllable. Yet even then, his attention remained fixed somewhere down the block. Officer Mercer followed the dog's gaze. So did his partner. There was nothing obvious to see. A row of parked vehicles. Storefront windows reflecting gray skies. Pedestrians hurrying through the drizzle. Ordinary city life. And yet Atlas continued watching. Waiting. Listening. Emily felt the slight tremor of concentration moving through the dog's body. You know something, do not you? She whispered. Atlas flicked one ear toward her voice, but never looked away from whatever had captured his attention. The rain grew heavier. Traffic hissed across wet pavement. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang the quarter hour. Then Atlas suddenly inhaled deeply. Once. Twice. His head lifted slightly higher. The low vibration returned to his chest. Not fear. Not aggression. Recognition. As if he had finally found the scent he had been searching for all along. Officer Mercer exchanged another glance with his partner. The expression was brief, but Emily sensed it immediately. Something had changed. The radio on the officer's shoulder crackled once more, followed by a short reply she could not fully hear. Around them, the crowd continued to grow despite the rain. Curious voices blended with the steady rhythm of water striking umbrellas and storefront awnings. Atlas remained focused. His ears stood tall. His breathing was slow and controlled. Then he took a careful step forward. Emily tightened her grip on the harness. Easy, Atlas. The dog paused but did not relax. Officer Mercer lowered himself slightly, so his voice would be closer to Emily's height. Emily, I need to ask you something. Okay. Were you walking through Jefferson Square about 20 minutes ago? Emily nodded. Yes, sir. Atlas and I always take that route to the library. Mercer looked toward his partner. The answer matched something they already knew. Did you notice anything unusual while you were there? Emily smiled sadly. It was a question she heard often. I am blind, officer. I do not notice things the way most people do. A few people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. The reminder carried a quiet truth that needed no explanation. Mercer nodded. Of course. I am sorry. Emily tilted her head slightly. But I can hear things. The officer leaned forward. What do you mean? Emily thought for a moment. The city noise seemed to fade as she searched her memory. There were a lot of people near the fountain today. More than usual. Someone was crying. A little girl, I think. Mercer's expression sharpened immediately. A little girl? Yes. She sounded scared. Atlas suddenly lifted his head higher. The movement was so sudden that even the nearby spectators noticed. His amber eyes remained fixed on the same distant point. Officer Mercer followed the dog's gaze again. Still nothing obvious. Yet the German shepherd's behavior was impossible to ignore. Mercer spoke into his radio. Confirm the age of the missing child. A voice responded almost immediately. Female. 8 years old. Emily frowned. Missing child. The officer hesitated. For a moment, he seemed reluctant to burden her with the information. Then he answered honestly. A young girl disappeared from Jefferson Square earlier this afternoon. The crowd fell noticeably quieter. Several people lowered their phones. The situation suddenly felt far more serious than anyone had imagined. Emily's fingers tightened around Atlas's harness. The girl I heard? Maybe. The word hung heavily in the damp air. Atlas released a low sound deep in his chest. Not a growl. More like a warning. Or perhaps a reminder. Officer Mercer slowly turned toward the dog. What are you trying to tell us, buddy? Atlas took another step forward. Then another. The movement was deliberate, almost cautious. He was not pulling wildly. He was leading. The difference mattered. Mercer noticed it immediately. Years of police work had taught him to recognize when trained animals behaved with purpose. Emily, he said carefully, has Atlas ever acted like this before? She shook her head. Only when he knows something important. The answer sent a ripple through the officers. Mercer's partner, Officer Lena Ramirez, scanned the block ahead. Her eyes moved across parked cars, delivery trucks, and pedestrians crossing through the rain. Everything appeared normal. Yet Atlas refused to look away. Suddenly the dog stopped moving. His nose lifted into the damp breeze. He inhaled deeply. Once. Twice. 3 times. Then he turned his head slightly toward a white utility van parked half a block away near the curb. It looked ordinary. Forgettable. The kind of vehicle nobody noticed in a busy city. But Atlas noticed. Every muscle in his body seemed to lock onto it. Officer Ramirez narrowed her eyes. That van was not there 10 minutes ago. Mercer followed her gaze. You sure? Pretty sure. Atlas took another step. This time his pace quickened. Not enough to alarm Emily. Just enough to make the officers move with him. Rain drummed softly against the pavement. Traffic lights reflected in shallow puddles. The city continued around them, unaware that something invisible had just shifted. Emily felt Atlas guiding her forward. His movements were steady now. Certain. For the first time all afternoon, he seemed to know exactly where he wanted to go. And somewhere beneath the scent of rain, wet concrete, and autumn leaves, the German shepherd had found a trail that nobody else could see. The white fin sat motionless beneath the gray sky, while rainwater streamed down its windows in thin, winding trails. Nothing about it appeared unusual at first glance. Its paint was clean. Its tires looked new. There were no broken lights, no damaged panels, nothing that would attract attention from passing drivers or pedestrians. Yet Atlas stared at it, as though the entire world had narrowed to that single vehicle. Officer Mercer slowed his pace. Officer Ramirez moved beside him. Neither officer spoke for several seconds. They simply watched the German shepherd. Experience had taught them that trained dogs rarely wasted energy. Every movement served a purpose. Every reaction meant something. Emily felt the growing tension around her. She could hear it in the silence. What is happening? She asked quietly. Mercer glanced toward her. We are not sure yet. Atlas continued forward. His paws splashed through shallow puddles as he guided Emily along the sidewalk. The crowd remained behind them now, curious but hesitant to follow. The distance between the dog and the van slowly shrank. 30 yards. 25. 20. The city sound seemed strangely distant. Even the traffic noise felt muted beneath the steady rhythm of rainfall. Atlas lowered his head slightly. His nose worked constantly. Scent after scent flowed through the damp air. Thousands of them. Wet asphalt. Coffee drifting from a nearby cafe. Fresh bread from a bakery half a block away. Engine oil. Damp clothing. Fallen leaves. And beneath all of it, one scent that held his complete attention. Emily sensed the change immediately. Atlas was no longer searching. He had found something. Atlas never acts like this unless he is sure, she said softly. OFFI. Additional police units began arriving within minutes. Their vehicles lined the curb beneath the rain, blue lights reflecting across wet pavement and glass storefronts. The scene remained calm, but an unmistakable sense of urgency now lingered in the air. Officer Mercer stood near the side of the van, while Officer Ramirez carefully listened. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The city seemed to hold its breath. Then the faint sound came again. A soft cry. Small. Fragile. Easy to miss beneath the weather. Emily heard it immediately. So did Atlas. The German shepherd lifted his head and released another low whine. This time there was no uncertainty. The sound was coming from inside the vehicle. Mercer stepped back and spoke into his radio. I need registration on this van immediately. The response came moments later. Stand by. Rain drummed against the roof of the vehicle. Water flowed along the curb in narrow streams. Atlas remained fixed in place, his eyes locked on the side door. Emily knelt beside him and wrapped one arm gently around his neck. She could feel his heartbeat. Strong. Steady. Focused. Good boy, she whispered. You found something, did not you? Atlas pressed slightly into her hand without taking his eyes off the van. The crowd from earlier had begun gathering again at a distance. Word had spread quickly. People sensed that whatever was happening was no longer a routine police stop. Yet nobody knew the full story. Officer Ramirez moved closer to the side panel and listened carefully. There it was again. A faint sound. Barely audible. Her expression changed immediately. Ryan. Mercer looked up. You heard it too? She nodded. Definitely. Several officers exchanged concerned glances. One of them approached with a portable flashlight and swept the beam across the windows. The rear section had dark tinting. Nothing inside was visible. Atlas suddenly stepped forward. The movement was immediate and decisive. Before anyone could react, he placed himself directly beside the sliding door and sat down. Perfectly still. Every trained officer on scene recognized the behavior. It was an alert. A deliberate signal. The kind service and working dogs used when they were absolutely certain they had found what they were searching for. Mercer stared at the dog for a long moment. He is telling us something. Emily smiled faintly. I know. The radio crackled again. Registration confirmed. Vehicle was rented yesterday. Return date scheduled for tomorrow morning. Mercer frowned. Rented by who? A brief pause followed. Then the answer arrived. Name appears valid, but the listed phone number is disconnected. Officer Ramirez looked toward the van. The pieces were beginning to fit together, though the picture remained incomplete. The missing 8-year-old girl. The unusual behavior from Atlas. The unexplained cries. The rental vehicle. None of it felt like coincidence anymore. Rain continued falling. Somewhere nearby, a traffic signal changed with its familiar electronic tone. Emily heard it and suddenly remembered something. Officer. Mercer turned toward her. Yes. The little girl I heard at the fountain. What about her? Emily hesitated. She sounded tired. The simple statement struck harder than she intended. Mercer felt a knot form in his chest. Atlas released another quiet whine and shifted closer to the door. The German shepherd was no longer investigating. He was waiting for the humans around him to catch up. Officer Ramirez approached carefully and placed a hand against the side of the vehicle. The metal felt cool beneath the rain. Then she heard it. Clearer this time. A tiny voice. Weak but unmistakable. Her eyes widened. Ryan. Mercer was already moving. The nearby officers immediately responded. Procedures were followed carefully and calmly. No panic. No shouting. Just focused professionalism. Within moments, authorization was given to open the vehicle. Emily remained beside Atlas. She could not see the expressions around her. She could not see the officers preparing. She could not see the crowd watching from behind the police tape. But she felt the change. The atmosphere had shifted completely. Atlas stood. His ears pointed forward. His tail remained still. Every part of him seemed to know that the moment he had been leading them toward was finally here. And as the officers reached for the side door, the rain continued falling softly over the city, washing the streets clean while a brave little dog prepared to reveal the truth hidden inside. The world seemed to narrow to a single sound as Officer Mercer carefully slid the side door open. Rain tapped against metal. Police radios murmured in the background. Somewhere farther down the street, a car horn sounded and disappeared. But none of it mattered now. Every eye focused on the opening doorway. For a brief moment, nobody moved. Then a small voice emerged from the darkness inside. "Hello." The word was weak, uncertain, yet it carried enough power to freeze the entire scene. Officer Ramirez immediately stepped forward. Her face softened. "It is okay," she said gently. "You are safe." A tiny figure slowly became visible inside the rear compartment of the van. A little girl sat wrapped in a blanket, clutching a stuffed rabbit against her chest. Her blonde hair was slightly tangled, and her eyes blinked against the sudden light. She looked frightened and exhausted, but unharmed. The officers exchanged looks of relief so profound that no words were necessary. The missing child had been found. Alive. Safe. Officer Mercer released a breath he had not realized he had been holding. Nearby officers lowered their shoulders. The tension that had gripped the street for nearly an hour began to loosen. Atlas stood perfectly still beside Emily. His mission was not finished yet, but something in his posture changed. The urgency faded. The certainty remained. Emily heard the collective shift in the atmosphere immediately. She smiled. "They found her, did not they?" Mercer turned toward her, surprised. "How did you know?" Emily gently rested a hand against Atlas's shoulder. "Because he is calm now." The German shepherd lifted his head slightly, as if confirming her answer. Officer Ramirez carefully helped the young girl out of the van. The child's small shoes touched the wet pavement. She looked around at the flashing lights, the officers, the umbrellas, and the crowd gathered beyond the police tape. Her eyes filled with tears, not from fear this time, but from overwhelming relief. A female officer knelt beside her. "Can you tell me your name?" The little girl nodded. "Sophie." The answer spread through the officers like sunlight breaking through clouds. Sophie. The name every radio transmission had repeated all afternoon. The child hundreds of people had been searching for. The little girl whose picture had already begun appearing on television broadcasts and social media feeds across the city. And now she was standing safely beneath the rain because one German shepherd had refused to ignore what nobody else noticed. Emily heard the officers speaking softly nearby. She listened carefully, not because she needed information, because she wanted confirmation. Then she heard the tiny voice of the rescued girl. The same voice she remembered from the fountain. The same voice she had described earlier. A smile spread across Emily's face. "That is her," she whispered. Officer Mercer looked down. "You recognize her voice?" Emily nodded. "I told you I heard her." The officer felt a lump rise in his throat. For hours, everyone had focused on what Emily could not see. Nobody had stopped to consider what she could hear. Rain continued falling gently across the city. Atlas finally relaxed enough to sit beside Emily again. The German shepherd blinked slowly and looked up at her. She reached down and scratched behind his ears. "Good job, partner." Atlas leaned into the touch. Around them, officers continued their work. Questions remained. Reports needed to be written. Details still needed clarification. But the most important part of the story had already happened. A child was safe. The city could breathe again. Then something unexpected occurred. Sophie looked across the street toward Emily and Atlas. Her tired eyes settled on the German shepherd. "That dog found me?" she asked softly. Officer Ramirez smiled. "Yes." Sophie stared for several seconds. Then she slowly walked through the rain toward them. Atlas remained calm as the little girl approached. When she reached him, she carefully extended one hand. The German shepherd lowered his head, allowing her fingers to touch his fur. Sophie hugged her stuffed rabbit closer. "Thank you," she whispered. Atlas responded by gently nudging her hand with his nose. No applause followed. No dramatic celebration. Just a simple moment beneath gray skies and falling rain. A lost child. A blind girl. A faithful dog. And a quiet miracle unfolding in the middle of an ordinary city street. The rain finally began to ease, falling now as a soft mist that drifted through the city like breath on cold glass. Police vehicles remained parked along the curb, their lights reflecting across wet streets and shimmering storefront windows. Yet the atmosphere felt entirely different from before. The tension was gone. In its place lingered something quieter. Gratitude. Relief. Wonder. Sophie sat beneath a large umbrella wrapped in a warm blanket while emergency personnel checked on her. She answered questions softly and held her stuffed rabbit close against her chest. Nearby, Officer Mercer listened carefully as investigators pieced together the timeline. The details mattered. Understanding mattered. But every answer seemed to lead back to the same unexpected truth. None of them would have found Sophie when they did without Atlas. The realization settled over everyone present. Mercer looked across the street toward Emily and her German shepherd. The image stayed with him. A blind 10-year-old girl standing calmly beside a dog who had somehow seen what dozens of adults had overlooked. He walked over slowly. Water dripped from the brim of his cap. Emily. She turned toward his voice immediately. Yes, sir. Mercer hesitated. For a moment, he searched for the right words. Then he gave up trying to sound official. I owe you an apology. Emily looked surprised. Why? The officer glanced toward the pavement. When I first stopped you, I thought you might have information because you happened to be nearby. He smiled faintly. I never imagined you and Atlas would become the reason we solved everything. Emily listened quietly. Then she shook her head. Atlas solved it. Mercer followed her gaze toward the German shepherd. Atlas sat calmly at her side, rainwater still clinging to his coat. The dog seemed completely uninterested in the attention surrounding him. Maybe, Mercer said softly, but he trusted you enough to lead us there. Emily reached down and rested her hand on the familiar service harness. The worn leather felt warm beneath her fingers despite the cool weather. It was the same harness Atlas had worn through thousands of ordinary days. School trips, library visits, grocery stores, sidewalks, crosswalks, days when nothing remarkable happened. Yet somehow it had carried them into this extraordinary moment. Across the street, Sophie noticed them again. This time she carefully walked over with one of the officers beside her. Her small boots splashed through shallow puddles. The stuffed rabbit remained tucked beneath one arm. When she reached Emily, she stopped. Neither girl spoke for several seconds. They were strangers connected by circumstances neither could fully understand. Finally, Sophie broke the silence. I heard your dog before I saw him. Emily smiled. Really? Sophie nodded. When everything felt scary, I heard him outside. Atlas lifted his head slightly at the sound of her voice. Sophie knelt and gently scratched beneath his chin. The German shepherd accepted the affection with quiet patience. I think he knew I was there, she whispered. Emily thought about that. Maybe he did. Maybe he recognized a frightened child. Maybe he followed a scent. Maybe years of training guided him. Or maybe some things did not fit neatly into explanations. The city around them continued moving. Traffic resumed. Store owners reopened doors. Pedestrians returned to their routines. Yet many of the people who had witnessed the afternoon lingered a little longer. They watched the two girls. They watched the dog. And they carried home a story they would tell for years. Officer Ramirez approached carrying a warm cup of hot chocolate. She handed it to Emily. You earned this. Emily laughed softly. Thank you. The rich scent of chocolate drifted upward through the cool air. Atlas immediately sniffed toward it. Several nearby officers laughed. It was the first laughter of the day. A simple human sound after hours of worry. The clouds above Portland began to break apart. A faint beam of late afternoon sunlight slipped through the gray sky and reflected across the wet streets. Golden light danced across puddles like scattered coins. Sophie looked upward and smiled. Emily could not see the sunlight. She could not see the reflections. She could not see the expressions on the faces surrounding her. But she felt something even more important. The warmth of Atlas beside her. The gratitude in people's voices. The peace settling over the street. And for the first time that day, everyone seemed to understand the same lesson. Sometimes sight is not what helps us find the truth. Sometimes trust does. By early evening, the rain had stopped completely. The clouds that had covered Portland all afternoon drifted eastward, leaving behind streaks of pale gold and soft blue across the sky. The city seemed brighter now, as if the storm had carried away more than just water. News of Sophie's recovery spread quickly. Television crews arrived. Reporters gathered near the police vehicles. Parents holding young children paused along the sidewalks to listen. Yet despite all the attention, the center of the story remained surprisingly quiet. Emily sat on a nearby bench beneath a maple tree whose leaves glowed amber in the fading light. Atlas rested at her feet, his head stretched across her shoes, perfectly content. The German shepherd had no interest in cameras, no interest in praise, no interest in becoming a hero. He had found what needed finding. For him, the mission was complete. Officer Mercer stood several yards away speaking with a reporter. He answered questions professionally, but every answer seemed to circle back to the same conclusion. The breakthrough had not come from technology. It had not come from luck. It had come from a service dog who refused to ignore his instincts and a young girl who trusted him completely. Across the street, Sophie's parents finally arrived. The moment they stepped from their vehicle, every conversation seemed to fade. Sophie ran toward them without hesitation. Her mother dropped to her knees and wrapped both arms around her. Her father joined them a second later. No words could fully describe the relief on their faces. Some of the officers looked away to give the family privacy. Others smiled quietly. A few blinked back tears. Even after years of service, certain moments never became ordinary. Emily listened to the reunion from a distance. She could hear the happiness in their voices, the trembling relief, the gratitude. It painted a picture more vivid than any photograph. Atlas lifted his head and listened too. His ears twitched once. Then he settled back down again. Emily smiled. "We did good today, huh?" Atlas responded with a soft huff and nudged her knee. The familiar gesture made her laugh. Nearby, Officer Ramirez approached carrying a small paper bag. "I brought something for your partner." Emily tilted her head. "What is it?" "Peanut butter dog treats." Atlas sat up immediately. The officers around them burst into laughter. "I think he understood that," Ramirez said. Emily laughed harder. "He always understands food." For a few minutes, the heavy emotions of the day gave way to something lighter. Human. The kind of laughter that arrives after fear finally loosens its grip. As the evening continued, people who had witnessed the events began approaching one by one. Some thanked the officers. Others thanked Emily. Many simply wanted to meet Atlas. An elderly man removed his cap and knelt beside the dog. A young boy carefully asked if he could pet him. A woman carrying groceries stopped just long enough to whisper, "Good dog," before continuing on her way. Through it all, Atlas remained calm and patient. Yet whenever someone praised him, his eyes drifted back toward Emily. It was as though none of the attention mattered unless she was nearby. Sophie eventually crossed the street with her parents and approached the bench. Her mother's eyes were still red from crying. Her father carried the expression of a man who had just received a second chance he never expected. "We wanted to thank you," Sophie's mother said softly. Emily smiled. "You do not have to." "Yes," her father replied. "We really do." Sophie stepped forward holding her stuffed rabbit. She hesitated for a moment before placing a small blue ribbon around Atlas's neck. The ribbon was slightly crooked. The knot was imperfect, but it was beautiful in a way no expensive award could ever be. Atlas sniffed it curiously. The adults laughed. Sophie smiled. "Now everyone knows you are a hero." Atlas looked completely unimpressed. His attention had already returned to Emily. The adults laughed again. The last rays of sunlight stretched across the city, turning windows into sheets of gold. Evening settled gently over Portland. Traffic flowed. Streetlights flickered on. And among the countless people returning home that night, there was a growing realization that the day had never really been about a missing child, a police investigation, or even a remarkable dog. It had been about something simpler. A bond so strong that one soul could trust another without ever needing to see the path ahead. 2 weeks later, the city gathered beneath clear autumn skies at a small community ceremony held in the park overlooking the Willamette River. The storm that had shaped that unforgettable afternoon was long gone. In its place stood rows of folding chairs, bright banners fluttering in the breeze, and families enjoying the gentle warmth of an October afternoon. Children ran across the grass. Dogs rested beside their owners. The scent of roasted coffee drifted from a nearby vendor cart. It felt like one of those ordinary American afternoons people often take for granted until they become memories. Emily sat quietly in the front row beside her grandfather. Atlas rested at her feet, wearing the same service harness he wore every day. The small blue ribbon Sophie had tied around his neck remained there as well. Slightly faded now, slightly crooked, still perfect. When Officer Mercer stepped to the microphone, the crowd gradually fell silent. He looked across the gathering, then toward the young girl and her faithful companion. For a moment, he seemed less like a police officer and more like a man trying to explain something that words alone could not fully capture. A lot of people have called Atlas a hero, he began. And they are right. A ripple of applause moved through the crowd. Atlas blinked once and looked completely unimpressed. The audience laughed softly. Mercer smiled. But what happened that day was about more than one remarkable dog. He paused. It was about trust. The kind of trust most of us spend our entire lives trying to build. Emily listened quietly. The autumn breeze brushed against her hair. Beside her, Atlas remained still. When many of us saw uncertainty, Emily trusted her partner. When others questioned, she believed. And because of that trust, a little girl made it home to her family. The crowd applauded again. Some people wiped away tears. Others simply nodded. Sophie and her parents sat several rows back. Her stuffed rabbit rested in her lap. She smiled the entire time. After the ceremony, people gathered throughout the park. Conversations filled the air. Children asked to meet Atlas. Parents shared stories. Reporters quietly packed away cameras. Life continued forward the way it always does. Yet something about that day felt different. As the sun slowly drifted toward the horizon, Sophie walked over to Emily carrying a small framed photograph. "I wanted you to have this," she said. Emily accepted it carefully. "What is it?" Sophie smiled. "It is a picture of all of us." Her father gently described the image. Emily listened closely. Sophie standing beside Atlas. Officer Mercer and Officer Ramirez smiling behind them. The river sparkling in the background. A moment frozen forever. Emily ran her fingers along the edge of the frame. "Thank you." Sophie hugged her. It was a simple gesture. One child thanking another. Yet it somehow carried the weight of everything that had happened. As evening approached, the crowd slowly dispersed. Families returned home. Vendors packed away equipment. Folding chairs disappeared one by one. Soon only a few people remained. Emily stood near the river with Atlas beside her. The water moved quietly beneath the fading sunlight. Geese crossed overhead in a loose formation. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang. The city sounded peaceful. Her grandfather placed a hand on her shoulder. "Ready to go home?" Emily nodded. Then she crouched beside Atlas and wrapped both arms around his neck. The German shepherd leaned gently into her embrace. "You know," she whispered, "everyone keeps saying you saved somebody." Atlas responded with a soft huff. Emily smiled. "But the truth is, you saved me first." The dog rested his head against her shoulder. For a moment, neither moved. The river flowed. The wind stirred the fallen leaves. The last golden light of day settled across the water like liquid fire. And in that quiet moment, there was no need for applause, awards, or speeches. Because some miracles do not arrive with fanfare. They arrive on four paws. They walk beside us through darkness. They guide us when we cannot see the road ahead. And sometimes, when the world is searching desperately for hope, they remind everyone that the strongest bonds are not built through sight at all. They are built through faith, loyalty, and love that never asks for anything in return.